welcome to Story Collisions and another video. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let's talk about Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. So whenever I read a rebellion narrative like this, a sort of a revolutionary narrative, I can't help but feel it's always less interesting than the narrative that comes after the revolution's been enacted. I always feel post-revolution stories are more interesting than stories about revolutions in progress. I don't know why that is, but I can already feel that reading the Red Rising series, and I'm already looking forward to what comes next in the follow-up series than seeing the conclusion of Darrow's personal revolution. I think there's something about it where it's much more challenging to write a post-revolution story than a revolutionary story. And that's true for writers as well as for the characters. And that's true for Darrow as well as a character. So we see he's very comfortable destroying the society that he's experienced, the oppression, and going against it. And he sees that as his primary role. But what comes next, he doesn't think about it. He puts that responsibility off onto other people. And for writers as well, like Pierce Brown, you can see how this kind of narrative almost writes itself. You have an unjust society, a character who's very oppressed as a protagonist, and then you give them a little bit of power themselves, and then they go up against the society and they inspire a revolution. And it's just that classic story, everything from Star Wars to Game of Thrones to Lord of the Rings. It's simple as that, writing in a straight line for the most part. And a revolution in progress kind of a story is exactly what Golden Sun is, for better or for worse. Let's look at Darrow for a moment, because there's a quote that I quite like that comes at the end of Golden Sun. No spoilers, I promise. It's more about him reflecting on his role in his own narrative. And this is how it reads. "I'm not the one with the answers. No one man or woman has all the answers. What I can do, what I am good at, is tearing down the men and women who would keep those minds shackled. That's why I'm here. It's why I exist." So this quote from Darrow really puts his character in a nutshell, I think. And it's also the sort of reason why this isn't a particularly interesting narrative, but the future sequel series, which I've heard about, I don't know a lot about it, but I'm assuming it'll be a post-revolutionary kind of a story where Darrow has to contend with the realities of ruling and restructuring society without committing the same sins of the society he's already revolted against. But before we get to that, let's talk about Golden Sun, and let's take it for what it is. The first thing I wanted to say is, thank God the Battle Royale format of the first book is gone, and it's a much stronger narrative for that. Because, you know, I love Battle Royale, the novel by Koshun Takami. I don't think I've ever read The Hunger Games, but I'm sure it still has its fans. But you have to do something quite interesting with it to make it work. So when I think of Battle Royale, the Japanese novel by Koshun Takami, it's the sort of narrative that is compelling because it puts ordinary high school students into this life and death situation, and it shows the many different ways they respond. And in some ways it's a metaphor for the society, which would have been Japan in the 90s. And that's fascinating. That does something really compelling. But the first book, Red Rising, there's no essential purpose for having a battle royale, except I guess Pierce Brown thought it would be kind of cool. And that was a real letdown and made it a bit of a slog to get through. In Golden Sun, like in Red Rising, Pierce Brown's prose is just unmemorable. There's nothing memorable here. He's no Ursula Le Guin. He's no Frank Herbert. And I hate to use the word because it's just a cliche in itself, but it's just workmanlike. I feel that especially at the moment because I'm currently also reading Grace of Kings by Ken Liu, which is a fantastic fantasy series, which I have read the first book in the past and I want to read the whole series now. But there's something about that. He just evokes the setting so wonderfully and so evocatively that you just get a real sense of the world, the characters, their motivations. It's very, very beautiful book to read, and just on a sentence by sentence level, it's incredible. But then I dip back into Pierce Brown's writing, and it washes over you. It's readable, you know. It doesn't get in the way of the story he's trying to tell, but there's just nothing remarkable about it. All that said, the book started strong, I felt, and I particularly enjoyed an early scene with a party, which reminded me of Dune and the Dune dinner scene. If anyone's read that, I'm sure you have. And it didn't stop there with the Dune comparisons, because Octavia, who's the ruler of the entire Gold Society, produces a sort of a construct lie detector, which is a bit like a scorpion that attaches to your arm and gives Darrow pretty much a life or death lie detector test. And it's very reminiscent of Dune and those opening chapters where Paul Atreides gets his own lie detector test, a similar sort of fashion, but with the box. But as I continued reading, I felt myself just losing interest in the plot, what was happening, the action scenes. He's not a strong action writer either, Pierce Brown, and I know there's a lot of praise on YouTube for it, but I can't quite understand why. It was definitely more readable than the first one. It set up some interesting characters, I guess. Like if I had to pick one, I quite like Severo. I think there's more to his character than we're really getting much of at the moment, and that'll be quite interesting to see how that develops. Again, I think it all comes back to this is just this sort of archetypal revolutionary narrative. It's a bit like, you could compare it to something like Les Miserables or Star Wars or, a million other things. But the one I keep thinking of is actually The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin, which is very much a post-revolution narrative. So in that story, in that novel, there's two planets, Urus and Anares. Urus is basically Earth as we know it. It's this liberal capitalist, not really a democracy, and that's very contrasted to Anares, which is an anarcho-communist society. And the origin of that was that the people rebelled successfully on Earth and fled to the nearby Anares and set up their own sort of anarchist society. And Le Guin in that book does some incredible things. So am I expecting that with Pierce Brown to be able to pull something like that off in the follow-up series? I don't think so, but I think there'll still be some interesting themes around, heavy lies the crown, and Darrow making that transition from a revolutionary figure to, perhaps a politician, someone who has to learn to lead and to try and reconstruct society in a way that isn't just a return to the oppression. Will I get to that series? I think so. I think I'll read Morningstar and we'll see how it goes. And so just another interesting tidbit that I found is that the Reds, that the lower class that Darrow's a part of, they all have their own manner of swearing, which is very common in sci-fi books. And they all say, "Gory damn," like, "Oh, gory damn this, gory damn that." And apparently there's a little tidbit around how that's to do with 700 years prior, before the Golds launched their rebellion from the moon against Earth. They, it's like the Golds were originally, I guess they were sort of English, and they'd abducted or put into chains the first Reds, and the first Reds were sort of from the Irish Isles, which is a bit of a classic. As someone who's, Irish background myself, so that's where they picked up that sort of language. So I appreciate those little bits of world building, but it's definitely too few and far between. And 2 books in, and we don't really have a sense of why this central conceit of, for 700 years, the Reds have thought they were preparing Mars for colonization and for a migration from Earth. So we have that conceit, but, Darrow found out about that early in the first novel. And 2 books in, nothing's happened since. We have no idea why. That's not relevant to the narrative at the moment. And yeah, I think it's something that, it's on the blurb of each book, that's kind of the central idea. That was probably the premise that Pierce Brown came up with, but it's just totally irrelevant to the narrative, which I feel is a very, very big loose thread that I would love to see explored more in Morningstar, which is the 3rd book of the series. So yeah, I might leave it there for now. And I look forward to hearing, what are your thoughts on the series? Have you read the first book, the second? How far did you get? Do you love it like most people on YouTube? Did you have more reservations like I do? I'd love to hear your opinions. So feel free to comment below. And please like and subscribe. And I'm hoping to get more content like this out. These sort of quick face-to-face reviews. Till next time.